Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Strat Fan Forum Football Show. But this is not just any Strat Fan Forum Football Show. This is a very special edition. We have with us today a very special guest. It's Glenn Guzzo. Thank you, Tom, with the Strat. Glenn from Strat-O-Matic, who has agreed to join us today on the recent release of the new Strat football version. We're going to talk to Glenn. We have some questions for him. He's going to give us some inside information on some of the things that goes into making the decisions on who gets what rating, who gets what type of offensive card, and we're just really excited to have him. And I'm joined as always by my co-host Tom Cooke. Tom, say hello.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, it's really exciting for us to be here with Glenn today. Glenn, of course, works for Strat-O-Matic. And Dennis is going to, I think, get us started with the question, Dennis. Of course, we should probably start by asking how come all the players on our Strat teams are on 6s. That would be a good place to start, no? Yeah. Why is this guy a 4? Oh, no. Anyway.
We'll make sure to submit our rosters to Glenn ahead of time next year so we can get that taken care of.
That's a good idea. I second that motion.
The only problem is I'm like in 12 leagues, so it would be like the entire set. I have one of these players on every one of my teams, so you can't give everybody a 6. But okay, so first of all, Glenn, just tell us a little bit about your background. How you got started playing Strat. I know probably Strat Baseball was your first experience, like many of us. But tell us how you got started and what led you to working for the company.
Well, I got started when I asked my mom to buy Strat-O-Matic baseball for my 12th birthday in 1963 after seeing a Strat-O-Matic ad in a sports magazine. I had been tinkering with some of the games of my own invention that were frankly pretty lame as it relates to statistical accuracy or especially as applied to particular individual players. I'd also dabbled with all-star baseball, which I found very unsatisfying because, no pitching, no fielding, no running, and the spinner was always on the line. And so there were arguments every single game. So we ditched that. And then to read in this ad about Strat-O-Matic that players would actually field and run and pitch as well as hit according to their real-life abilities, I was sold immediately. I didn't need to send for a brochure. I wanted the game. So that was from the very, almost the very start of Strat-O-Matic baseball. As soon as football was added, I started playing that from the very first year. Same with hockey when it came out. The only game I didn't play regularly immediately was basketball. I started playing that regularly when they redesigned it. The original design was more of a half-court game, and I found it to be pretty sluggish. But I still now play all of the Strat-O-Matic games, baseball most of all, but of course I'm heavily involved in the baseball and football ratings. That began, I think, about 2000 with the 2006 season when Hal asked me if I'd be interested in taking over some of his responsibilities. He gradually phased into a lower involvement with the company in terms of the number of hours he was putting in. By that time, Hal and I had already had a very, very strong relationship that began with me as a news reporter interviewing Hal from about the mid-'70s on, now and then, for various publications. And then, as many of you know, I started a publication of my own called Strat Fan that appeared first in 1991, ran through 1999. And then, of course, wrote the Strat-O-Matic Fanatics book, which came out in 2005. It was after that that Hal approached me about doing some of the ratings for the games.
Very cool. And where did you grow up? Are you from New York, or did I see Jacksonville, Florida as one of your...
Well, I live in the Jacksonville, St. Augustine area now in a town called Ponte Vedra Beach. But I grew up in Detroit. So I was there until I was 24. And then began my life as a journalism vagabond, moving from Michigan to Texas, then Texas to Philadelphia, Philadelphia to Miami, Miami to Akron, Ohio, Akron to Denver, Denver to the area I'm in now.
Very good. Did the Lions capture your heart before you left Detroit, or do you not have a particular team you follow?
Well, I follow the sports. Having gone around, lived in so many cities, but I did adopt teams. In our neighborhood, growing up in Detroit, we lived right adjacent to a park, and so every house had kids, and we were rather precocious sports fans. We would adopt teams and seem to know everything about them, including their beer jingles.
Nice.
And so, but while it was okay to root for the home team, the Detroit teams, if you were really cool, you knew everything there was to know about some other team. So I adopted the Cincinnati Reds. This is back like 1961 when Vada Pinson and Frank Robinson were very thrilling. I adopted the Minnesota Vikings when Fran Tarkenton was running around for his life in the backfield with great fanfare.
Nice.
The Chicago Blackhawks, who then were finally becoming a decent team with Stan Mikita and Bobby Hull, Glenn Hall, Pierre Palat. And the Cincinnati Royals, who no longer exist, but Oscar Robertson was my favorite player. So those were the teams I adopted, and other guys in the neighborhood adopted different teams. There was some overlap, and we had an awful lot of trash talking as a consequence of our different interests.
Sure. So, I heard you mention you're involved in the ratings for baseball and football. So what exactly do you do for the company as far as the ratings go at this moment?
Are you talking about football specifically?
Yeah, we can focus on football. We'll leave the baseball to the baseball guys. So what ratings do you do for football?
Well, for football, basically I do what Hal had done previously. There's always been a division of responsibility in terms of various people being involved, but my work is principally with all the individual ratings. So that will be the individuals who play defense, the individuals on the offensive line, and all the carded skill players. Now, I do some work that sets up for the other work to be done with the team cards, but I do not specifically work with the specialist card or with the team defense card, the off tackle and the linebacker off tackle, the end run, flat pass, the short pass, long pass cards. And curiously enough, while I work with the rest of the quarterback card and the skill players cards, I don't do anything with the quarterback flat pass.
Okay.
All of that stuff that I said I don't do is done in-house, primarily now by Len Schwartz, who took over those responsibilities when James Williams retired, and somewhat also now by John Garcia, who had a lot to do with, for instance, the yards after the catch feature that is new this year. I also took over one of James Williams' responsibilities, and that is the roster work to decide who's going to get carded and who is going to get rated.
Gotcha. Very cool. I'm hearing some names I've never heard before. James Garcia, welcome to the
John Garcia.
John Garcia. John Garcia and Len. I've heard Len Schwartz's name before. So it used to be Hal and James Williams working together primarily, and then after Hal backed off and James retired, it's now become Glenn with John and Len. Is that right?
Correct.
Cool.
Correct.
Glenn, I think I think Dennis will jump ahead to a question that I think is connected to something that Glenn just mentioned. When you talk about the individual ratings, for the blockers and the individual defenders, and of course we all know that they work with the team defensive cards. You said someone else kind of primarily does the work on the team defensive cards. Is there a point of origin for the ratings? Do you say, I'm going to start with offensive linemen, or I'm going to start with defensive front seven, and then maybe the team run defenses come because those will work together? I'm kind of curious what the process is in terms of where you start. And, of course, I assume there's constant revision along the way because you change one thing and it affects something else.
Yeah, there's, our formulas are wraparound formulas. They're very strongly affected. I mean, football is the ultimate team sport, right? And what happens in one aspect of the offense affects the rest of the offense. What happens with the offense affects the defense, and vice versa. So strength of schedule is a very big deal in the formulas. Each team has their own norms based off of the league norms and the actual opponents they played. We do have a starting point. Of course, the starting point for me is the roster work, which is not as simple as you might think. It is actually weeks in the making. And then the the next step is, yes, we're going to work with the offensive linemen's run block ratings and the all three tiers of the defense 0, 4, 5, 6 ratings. Those get set first. That's also pretty extensive work as it relates to the defense. The offense, of course, there's fewer players with just the offensive linemen. But as you probably know from your in-depth discussions on the forum and those by other guys, is Strat-O-Matic generally tries to distribute the 0s, 4s, 5s, and 6s in certain percentages in a given year. We might fluctuate slightly from year to year, but it tends to be a slight fluctuation. Go ahead.
And just to clarify for the listeners, Glenn means the total number of 0s, 4s, 5s, and 6s that are in the set, not necessarily per individual team. Although I was curious, are there a certain number of defensive points, certain ranges of defensive points that you don't want to go beyond or go below in terms of historical teams like 85 Bears or one of those mid-70s Steelers team having maybe the maximum number of 6s, not the maximum, but a certain number that teams are generally not going to go beyond. So then a team that's maybe got a good defense, but not a defense like the 75 Steelers or the 85 Bears, is only going to get a certain number of total sort of defensive points possibly.
No, there is not a point system, and there is not a historical reference that says this team has already achieved the max and nobody can go beyond it. History keeps rewriting itself, and different eras play different styles, and to say that what one team did in the 1950s or 60s or 80s supersedes anything that could happen in the 2000s and 2010s is not the way Strat-O-Matic thinks.
Sure. So so what you just laid out for us is you'll start offensive line run blocking, you'll go into individual defenders, that the entire process is very interconnected and constantly being adjusted as you do all of that. Obviously, the strength of schedule plays a big part. That's something that's been talked about in the forum that a lot of guys overlook. Hey, why does this guy not have a better running card? And then you see that he played 7 teams that have average to poor or poor run defenses, and that's gonna come into play when you're doing a replay. We all know that Strat in all the sports focuses on a stock team replay, even though a lot of us like to play the draft leagues. Now, Dennis had put a question in here talking about the sources you use. We noticed this year, maybe for the first time because we were paying more attention and doing these shows, I don't know, that there seemed to be a lot of correlation, not on 100%, but a lot of correlation between a lot of the Pro Football Focus ratings and a lot of the ratings we get in the game this year. But in general, could you talk about maybe some of your sources and influences and maybe some things you do and don't do without giving away the whole candy store?
Well, I won't be giving away candy stores, but we can get a flavor of it anyway, and that is, we do use a variety of statistical sources. One of them is Pro Football Focus. It's important to understand that while Pro Football Focus makes a contribution because they're doing things that nobody else had done before, and we want to pay attention to that, that it is not our only statistical source, and the statistical sources are also not exclusive to us as sources. We actually have scouts, people who are professional scouts, who give their assessments of players. We do a great deal of reading. We'll read what Pro Football Focus publishes, but we read a lot of other sources, individual newspapers, online sites that are devoted to football. Some are, major names everybody recognizes. Some are a bit more obscure. We have data that is also produced specifically for Strat-O-Matic by data production sources. And we have our own formulas that then massage that data. And I will tell you that things that are as simple as a receiver card, those cards look to be so simple. There's only a certain number of combinations for each type of receiver, just a few columns, less complicated columns than the other offensive players. It's an amazing number of steps to produce a receiver card. And And it's because of all the different input we have. I will tell you that this year more than ever, in my recollection, the scouts and the data sources, including Pro Football Focus, were more in alignment, more in agreement than usual.
Interesting. With the introduction of the split ratings, Tom and I had talked about this before we got the ratings preview, that we're guessing is going to be like 20 to 30% variance between a player's run and pass rating. But when we got the preview, and as you can see with the release of the game, it's like almost every single player has a different run rating and a pass rating.
The linebackers specifically.
Yeah, did you try to do that on purpose? Like, okay, we're not going to give anybody the same rating, or was it just that's the way it naturally came out based on the scouting reports and the statistics?
It's the way it came out. We didn't say, this percentage has to have the same rating. This percentage is going to vary by 1. This percentage is going to vary by 2. We don't do it that way. I think that this is something that Hal's been wanting to put in the game for a long time. It's something that I've been advocating. And only recently do we have data good enough to basically say, yeah, now we can rate these guys separately. There had been a way to rate them separately before, but through the reading we were doing, through some of the scouting reports we get, but we just didn't feel that it was strong enough. Now that we have data to go with it, that really helps. And if you do look at something like Pro Football Focus, I will say actually where Pro Football Focus probably is most influential at this point is by giving us the snap counts of every player in the situations. So, for instance, we know how many times each back run block, how many times they pass block.
Nice.
Okay, so that that tells you a lot just in terms of his usage, how the player was used. And so if you take a linebacker, linebackers are the most volatile in these split ratings, of course, and for good reason. Some of them are predominantly pass rushers. Some of them are platoon players who are there on downs 1 and 2. Others come in packages. So you look at a guy and you say, well, gee, he hardly ever was in coverage. Here's a full-time player who was in coverage 35 times all year.
Right.
He's probably not going to get a 6, unless he's all pro, right?
Right.
And that's another one of the sources, of course, is we're using the All-Pro and we're using the Pro Bowl. And those things can throw some of the other stuff off because, as we know, the Pro Bowl ratings are a little funky sometimes. We're especially not swayed much by the Pro Bowl rating, the Pro Bowl selections after the initial selections. When you start getting the alternates who are in there only because the Super Bowl team players aren't in there, only because so many guys have dropped out because of injury. Now you're starting to get into areas where these guys weren't elected, really, they were fill-ins. And so we tend to give very little weight to that. It could be a tiebreaker. And by tiebreakers, I guess it's worth telling you probably what you have heard before, but maybe not all of your viewers and listeners have, is that a whole lot of players are borderline between a 4 and a 5 or a 4 and a 0.
Okay.
Even some 5s and 6s are borderline, but the guys who are going to get the 5s is always a very sensitive list in terms of how many guys are borderline. And the guys who are going to get 0s, sometimes that's effective too. There's a whole lot of guys, probably the majority of the league, who, if you just said, how consistent were they all season long, you'd say they were 4s. Pro Football Focus is one of those who say, we can give you, for every player, we can give you 20 plays to make them look like a Pro Bowl player.
Right,
and we give you 20 plays to make them look like a practice squad player.
Right.
So if I look at all the information we have, the more information you have, the more possible conflict there is, right?
Right.
If I only have one source, it is what it is.
Right.
If you have 2 sources, there's going to be some disagreement. Now you got 6 sources. Now you got stuff coming from different directions. And so you see somewhere that this guy had a bad 3 games in a row. and then he's elected to the Pro Bowl because he had 13 really good games.
Right.
And how many guys really had 13 really good games anyway?
Right, right. And he could have had an injury or some other issue or some personal issue that made him not play up to his normal potential in those games.
Sure.
So that's good stuff. Now this release saw a ton of changes, a lot of influential or important, drastic, if you might say, rule changes. You talked a little bit about John Garcia leading the change to the flat as runs rule. Can you talk a little bit about how a big change like that comes to play? Who comes up with the idea? How is it discussed? And how do you go about implementing it?
Well, there's a lot of discussion about these things. Sometimes the discussion starts in the community, with someone saying, hey, I keep really close data on this stuff, on the way we have a 26-team league, and we have all this data, and the completion percentages are too low, or the run calls are awfully low, or whatever it is. And then when we hear that not once but over time, and we hear it from a variety of sources, and we have good data, then that can be influential as long as it's something we're able to do without disrupting the rest of what we do. So I've already hit on a few key points here that we'll talk about a little later, if you want to know more about how influential people in the community can be. But that's one place the conversation starts. The conversation will also start with people like Bob Winberry, Hal, Len Schwartz, John in the case of the yards after the catch, me. I've been a strong advocate for the split ratings. We finally had the data. I'm very pleased that we're able to do it this year. I also, because we now have data on such things as how many times quarterbacks kneel down, I advocated let's take the kneel downs out of the quarterback running stats, just like in baseball.
Which has made a really big difference in the must-run columns and end-run columns this year. You look at Aaron Rodgers has 11, I think it's +5, or 2 through 11. The end-run cards for Russell Wilson, and that's a great change because some guys I assume I don't know the numbers off my head, but I assume that some NFL quarterbacks who run, maybe like a Cam Newton or a Russell Wilson, they might have, if their team had a good year, they might be getting 10, 12, 14 carries for negative 18 yards on kneel downs. They only carry the ball maybe 80 times. That's a big impact on the final stats.
That's a very big impact. If a guy was only carrying maybe 50 times and he had 8 kneel downs, I mean that's really going to affect his average. And we saw that even guys who didn't run a lot, if they had a half a dozen or more kneel downs, it really affected their average, sometimes by a couple of yards per carry. Russell Wilson's a perfect example. Here's a guy, although he runs a lot for a quarterback, he doesn't run a lot for a running back, right?
No. Right.
So, but he's got a winning team that wins a lot, and they're ahead late in the game, and he's doing more kneel downs than other quarterbacks.
Right.
Rodgers, same kind of thing. All right, so these guys can run in the first place, and now you start taking away all their -2s from their kneel downs.
Yeah. There's always been a lot of debate in the community about just how effective the running quarterbacks are in Strat and the must-run quarterbacks are. They certainly look a lot more dangerous and explosive this year than they had for many years. I think back in the day, back in the early 90s and stuff, you had some great cards with Randall Cunningham and Steve Young and stuff like that, and there's been some others, Dante Culpepper and Donovan McNabb. But I think it's a change that the community embraces wholeheartedly. I think a lot of the changes over the years, and a lot of small, minor changes and tweaks over the years that have just been great additions to the game and created things that we never had before. Whether it's a snap fumble or the receivers fumbling, or now you can defer the coin toss in the computer game. Just all kinds of little things that have been well received. I think obviously some were not so well received, but the split ratings, the quarterback kneels down being removed from the yardage have been stuff that guys have been very, very, very much in favor of. You mentioned before that you have been advocating split ratings for a long time. Dennis was talking about where rules come from and who's involved in the process. Dennis had a question here where he was curious how long some of these proposals and ideas have been on the back burner. How long, how long was something like?
Yeah, let's talk first specific about the flat passes as runs. How long has that been on the back burner, or was that brand new this year due to the complaints about completion percentage?
And where did it come from also, since you mentioned where these things come from?
All right, well, let me see if I can divide the question. You know, where it came from, I think probably in this area more than most, the data we've gotten from experienced leagues about run calls versus pass calls and the completion percentages and so forth is something that we've been made aware of for years. And as you have seen in the way Strat has developed its cards over the years, it has tried to address this, strengthening the flat pass columns for quarterbacks, for instance, that came in years ago.
Okay.
All right. So the evolution of the rules that has gotten us to this point about the flat passes runs has been years in the making as a result, one, of the data the game is producing, the way people are playing it, but also the way the NFL has evolved. You know, there are a lot of teams now that use these quick passes to the line of scrimmage or behind as a substitute for runs. A third and three is a passing down.
I know, it's crazy.
Okay, so, you know, when Strat-O-Matic's game was coming out, and for decades, 3rd and 3 was maybe a 50-50 call or a rundown. You know, 3rd and 2 was definitely a rundown. 3rd and 2 in the NFL now is pretty much a passing down.
With 4 wide receivers.
I know.
Yeah, yeah. So you know, what we're seeing is not just that the NFL loves to pass, which there are multiple reasons for them to want to love it, including the way the rules are set up in the NFL now. But we're seeing that teams would rather use a third wide receiver than a fullback. They're not doing a lot of power running. And we'll read every year about teams that just can't get the goal line offense to run in touchdowns. And they're having really trouble in short yardage situations. Yeah, they don't have a fullback on the roster,
Right.
and they're not using a power running game at any other time almost in their offense, and no wonder, you know. So it's a constant challenge for us then to say, all right, we want our game to play the way the NFL is playing. We would want our coaches to feel like they're real NFL coaches to the extent possible, even though they got 20/20 hindsight. You know, right. We want the teams to play as teams. You know, this can frustrate sometimes draft leaguers because they're taking a player out of his context and they want him to reflect something that, you know, is really not characteristic of his team, more characteristic of the individual. It's probably important to underscore that even today, Strat-O-Matic football is the game most likely of all the Strat-O-Matic games to be played with stock teams.
Right. No, absolutely. There's not very many stock baseball leagues, if there are at all.
Well, actually, there are. Let me correct you about that. Actually,
yeah,
stock teams are still the most popular way of playing all the Strat-O-Matic games, but football is the one where is very, very clear majority of teams that people are playing with stock teams.
Yeah, and you can actually play an entire stock league. You can get 32 guys together and play an entire season, whereas it may be a lot, you know, because it's only 16 regular season games. Right. Whereas in baseball, you're committing yourself to if you wanted to play the whole season, that's a lot of time that you're putting into it. 132 or however many Major League Baseball teams there are. Is it 32, 30? And 160. Yeah, 30 coaches on 162 games. That's a big commitment.
Yeah. So now finish the answer to Tom's question. You know, about how long it was in the works. You know, so in a way, it's been years in the works. It's been an evolution. But then it was really this year the discussion stepped up about making this step on the flat passes runs. There wasn't a lot of discussion about that a year ago.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Go
Let
ahead,
me just say something real quick. So, because Tom and I talked about this a little bit before, saying this rule makes a lot of sense for the guy who is doing a solo replay, so he can get his percentages closer and the flat passes runs. It wouldn't be as big of an impact. Whereas in online play, I'm actually really interested. I'm glad that you said that you guys actually care about what draft leaguers do and how we play it out, because those are way out of whack, and that's specifically because of the way people call the game. So I like that this idea is to try to get people to call more run. It's very difficult in online leagues to get a majority of coaches to call run even 20 or 30% of the time. Well, 30 or 40% of the time. They'll call run 10 to 20% of the time, but that's usually about it. So I'm interested to see how this plays out.
So what do you think? What do you think is going to happen? How about with on the side of the offensive calls?
Well, let me take this first. So what I think is going to happen is, unfortunately, a majority of the leagues will say we're going to wait and see what happens, and see what happens to other leagues, and then we'll talk about it next year seriously. But Tom and I are starting a league with very good coaches called the Flat Pass Experimental League, or the FPXL.
You forgot a letter. FPRXFL. Flat Passes as Runs Experimental Football League.
Oh boy!
So
Trademark.
You guys work for the government or what?
Exactly. So we're going to run it through its paces in that league. That's a 10-season league, a 10-game league. And then I'm going to use it in my stock league, and I'm also going to use it in my draft league. So we will get some data, but I think a lot of people are afraid of the dynamics of what it will do to online play.
Yeah, well, Glenn, since you asked us, Glenn, what we think of the rule, well, I guess first you said how we think it'll play on offense. I think it is a very controversial rule. Now, one of my questions I was going to ask you was: is the company aware? Is the company aware of how the community reacts to certain rules, proposals, and options? I mean, this draft forum, I guess. I mean, there's probably There's probably not a lot of guys who are regularly active in the Strat forum, but there's a lot of everyone who's there is very avid and diehard. So I don't know if you guys also get emails and letters, and maybe the Strat forum is like a smaller percentage of the whole Strat football community, but we kind of think of ourselves as the center of that universe, of course, being so narcissistic. But there are some rules that come out that are very, very controversial. I can't remember any one, even the white die 6 linebacker rule, and even the dump off, which were controversial at the time, but now have been pretty much accepted. I can't remember any other rule being greeted as negatively as the flat passes runs rule, which is such a great change in the game. So before I talk about the rule, I mean, is the company aware of what negative feedback or community feedback, or is the Strat forum such a small part of the whole Strat football community? How does the company get its feedback from the fan base, the player base?
We take feedback wherever we can get it. Of course, we pay attention to the forum. I won't say that the forum decides the issues, but we're very aware, and of course, when the community is showing some true consensus about something, that can be more influential. I'm sure you're aware, from being on the forum as often as you guys are, that consensus is sometimes difficult to achieve.
Yes. First of all, you need to put on ignore Smokey Joe and Earl. After that, you're okay.
That's right. Earl is harmless. He just wants to know Earl asks like 2 very obvious questions every year. Like, oh, hey, so is Tom Brady going to have a good guard this year? Yeah, I think he will.
Well,
we'll be pretty good.
There are a couple keywords you guys used in your question. One of them was options. So okay, it's an option. You don't like the rule? Go use the rule. All you have to do is have agreement among 6 or 8 or 20 of you. You don't have to have the whole community in agreement, right? Okay, exactly. Or you just need a commissioner who says, look, there's going to be a lot of input, but we're going to have a league that's using these rules.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's not using these rules. Who wants in?
Yeah, okay? Penalties.
And so this is the way it's done in all the sports. And with changes as dramatic as the ones this year, we're going to be very eager to find out what people's actual playing experience is. Now, I'll tell you, it's going to be more influential to hear from people who have actually used the rules than people who are only speculating about what this can mean.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's why we're starting this league. Actually, most of the draft league. Now, Dennis and I are pretty much draft players. The form mostly consists, I think, of draft players and solo replayers. So we kind of really focus on the draft league.
Well, that's not true. That's not true. Remember, I'm in 12 leagues, so I'm in every possible stock league out there, just about. So I played the Seahawks in my SFF, RL, USFFL, and NSFL. So and Snarl if it ever plays.
Yeah. Dennis, and on probably 90% of Dennis's stock draft teams, he has Russell Wilson as well.
Yes.
So
be kind to me. Yes.
But Dennis and I are starting this FPR XFL for the reason you said. I mean, I'm not a fan of the rule, but like you said, until you try it, you don't really know what you're talking about. So we're going to play it, and we're going to see how it plays out online with veteran good coaches, see what type of strategies come up, see, maybe it'll be better than we think. I think it plays real well, and Dennis said this earlier. It seems like it'll play real well for like the solo replayer, the guy who's trying to, simulate the NFL, recreate the NFL, and is worried almost primarily about his stats coming out right. And I think the rule will weaken rushing averages down to more where they should be, and of course it'll increase passing numbers more to where they should be and where they are in the NFL. You asked us like what I think.
Tom, tell him what you're worried about, Tom. Tom's worried about that it can be exploited and a team would never have to run the ball or something like that, right?
Yeah,
Tom?
well, I feel like, and again, we focus more on the draft league aspect of it. So, I don't know how important it is to you guys in terms of this rule. And like you said, it's an option, and there's a million options out there, and guys can pick and choose, which I think is a great thing in the game. I worry that with the flat passes as runs. Right now, when you have a mid-level or lower than that, mid-level or worse running back, I'm saying without this option, you can run the ball kind of safely. You can run the ball. No one's going to call run against you. And you can run the ball, and if you have success, then they might start calling run. Then they might start respecting it, and it's more of a play-action sort of dynamic to the passing game, which is not necessarily realistic, but that's the way it is when you have a guy at a 3.7 average and doesn't have a very good card. With the new rule and the flat pass being so strong, guessed wrong, if I think the defense is going to call run to try and stop my flat pass, I'm going to throw a pass that is not affected by the flat pass as run cool. I'm going to throw a looking pass, a short pass, or a long pass. There's no incentive for me to run the ball with a mid-level to low-level running back, because the defense is going to be calling run more often. So when I'm looking for my right-wrong and my best average yards per play, I'm saying if I think he's going to call pass, I'm going to throw a flat pass. Guess wrong. If I think he's going to call, if I think he's going to try and stop a flat pass, I'm going to throw a downfield pass or a looking pass. So unless I have one of those, high-end backs, maybe the top 12 or so backs in the set this year, let's say, I feel like the only time I'm going to run the ball is inside the 10 when I can't throw flat, and if I need maybe 3 yards or less for a first down, whether it be second, third down, or fourth down.
Well,
those are the things that I worry about, and I have looked at teams and had draft teams where I've said, you know what, if this rule is in place, I think I'll run the ball maybe about 9 times a game with this team and be successful. So it's not a matter of throwing 58 passes and getting killed, but it's a matter of actually it being a viable strategy. And I know those things can happen in some NFL games. Some teams do throw over 50 times certain games, but I think the pass-run ratios on the offensive side will be even more out of whack than they are in the NFL for a lot of stock teams or draft league teams. So those are things that concern me about the rule.
Well, we'll be very interested in that data. And, that's what we encourage people to do, is give us the numbers, not just, I played a game and this really didn't work out well.
Right.
Okay. So, and we do hear a lot of that.
Yeah.
Okay. And you see that on the boards as well.
Yeah, forget it. Yeah.
I had this heated discussion with my brother many years ago, who felt that it was just too strong to be able to double team and key running backs. And so he was playing in a league where they limited it to 2 calls per series. A defense couldn't do that. You couldn't do it every down. And I was arguing with him. I said, it really depends on the talent, and it depends on the play calling. And no, he wouldn't have anything to do. I said, okay, we'll test this. I said, tell you what, you can pick a team for me to play that you can absolutely shut down. I mean, he was making the argument that a team that didn't have a good passer, you could take their running back out of the game. And I said, well, yeah, if they don't have a good passer, I mean, of course you're going to, it depends on the talent, though. So I said to him, I'll tell you what you do. You pick the team you think that you can shut down with these rules by double teaming and keying as often as you want. And I will play that team. I said, but before you pick it, the other catch to this is I get to pick your team that you're going to play with. All right, so you pick any team you want, the whole set. I get to pick my opponent. So this was back in the days when like Malone was the quarterback for Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Right. So I get the Steelers, and I got Thornton in the backfield, and some sort of basic running backs who can get you
Walter Abercrombie
wrong, but they're not going to break away and all that. But the team I chose for him was one of the worst Bengals teams that were poor, very poor against the run and very poor against the pass, right? And so I still felt I could call any play because I had 50% of the rolls on the defensive card. So I quietly kept track during the game how many times he double teamed and how many times he keyed me. Whole game. He did it 3 times.
Yikes.
And I won the game.
Of course.
he did it 3 times because his defense was so porous. He didn't want to take all those chances and leave stuff open, right?
Yeah. And so he didn't have the team to play that way.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so he did it 3 times the whole game and he lost. So that really ended that discussion. And when I hear certain arguments being made on the forum or elsewhere about a really isolated sample. I played a game and Emmitt Smith couldn't get any yards because the other guy gets run and Keith Smith all the time. And I'm thinking, you got Troy Aikman, and you got Irvin, and you got Novacek, and it's like, did you really have trouble beating this guy if he's calling run on every play? Smith only had 30 yards. Yeah, okay, but Aikman could have had 4.
Yeah. That's one of the things I think is great about Strat is that for every action you can have a counter. If you have a strategy you want to try, there should be a counter that you can use to stop that. That's what makes it such a great head-to-head game, and second to none in my opinion, especially in online play compared to the other sports or any other type of game. This gives you that chess match with the NFL flavor, and the cat and mouse is what really makes it great.
Yeah, head-to-head Strat football. I mean, for those of us who pretty much only play online, and once you're playing someone live, and I do go back to the dice and cards and games with my brothers, but once you're playing against humans, it's hard to play against the computer and really get the same type of thrill because every single play it's that right-wrong dynamic. I wanted to talk about the computer game vis-a-vis the board game. I don't know what type of sales numbers you guys have in terms of a percentage of computer games compared to board games, but I mean the computer game has this virtually unlimited capacity, to add complexity and nuance and charts out the wazoo because you don't have to sit there with 100 charts and dicing cards and try and go through them. And it's really great, I think, for the computer players because so many little things get added, whether it's the punt rolling, whether it's the variable field goal, things that if you were a dicing card player and wanted to add all those things, it would be a little more difficult and add probably a lot of time to your gameplay. So how far away from like the Dyson board game and Dyson board game playability do you feel the computer game is willing to go? And of course, all these things being optional makes it easier to do that. So how far away is it? Are you willing to go from in terms of making it still a playable Dyson card game with a lot of options? And how much complexity are you guys willing to add? I mean, flat passes runs a pretty complex rule.
It's a good question. I think the company has proven in baseball and football that it's willing to let the computer go pretty far away from what the board game can do. And I think that's because of the computer's ability but also because the play value of the board game is so important. I mean, no one really wants to, very few people really want to play a 3-hour board game. Okay, so
right.
And some people may just play that slowly because they're savoring every moment. They want to be able to take all the time and not feel rushed. But most people that I've talked to, and I've been doing this for over 50 years, and I've been devoted to Strat-O-Matic the whole time, but I've also sampled or more many other brands. And that is, most people want to be able to play a board game in an hour or less. In football, they're willing to take it a little longer, but there aren't that many people who love even a 2-hour game, let alone a 3. So, that said, there are some limits that the board game imposes on the computer game. For instance, we only have so many carded offensive players. But there are also some limits the computer game imposes on the board game. For instance, why do we need to rate fullbacks in the board game if a team like New England didn't have one? Well, we do because the computer game has formations that call for that.
Yeah.
Right? And so those formations have to be supported. One of the formations that has to be supported is a 5-man defensive line. Well, you got a 3-4 defense where the 3 guys started 16 games each, and you got one sub nose tackle on the whole team, who had played 80 snaps, and you got or less, and then you've got 2 defensive, and sometimes it's really tough to make that happen within the limited number of guys who can also be rated for the board game. We have a certain number of slots for subs. So every year, one of my challenges is how do I make this work for the computer game and the board game, while I'm also satisfying the challenge of playing as stock teams, but also looking at these guys' integrity of their ratings across the set. So we're looking at stock teams. We don't take stock teams in isolation. It's, just as we ask that draft leaguers don't think of their players out of the context of the team, we still want there to be the ratings to have the integrity of saying, these guys are the best running backs in the league. That should show on their card.
Makes sense.
These are the best quarterbacks in the league. That should show on their card. These are the wide receivers who get double teamed. These are the wide receivers who are dominant players. And the same goes for defenders. And so there is a balancing act that I find fascinating and probably the most fun part of the job, even though it can really lengthen the process of rating players. I love puzzles, and this is a puzzle every year. Getting the 5s in the right places, and the 4s and the 6s, and it was this a year that reflected more of a certain aspect that the NFL was evolving to, toward run or toward passing or toward certain types of formations and certain types of players doing certain things. How well is this season going to play as the season? And there's an extra complexity here, and that is a 16-game season produces very volatile results.
Yes, absolutely.
A 162-game season in baseball, we got that pretty cold. But a 16-game season, you get a blowout or 2. And boy, that can really distort the picture of what that team was.
For sure, for sure. Now, you had talked a little bit about the process. One of the anomalies that we see in this year's set is a card like Justin Forsett's, where he has like no positive yardage from like 4 to 10 or 5 to 10 guessed wrong. How do you determine who gets those chunky running back cards and who gets more consistent short gains? Is that based on data from a statistical set or from a scout, or what type of, or just from watching games, or how do you determine that?
All of the above, but there is a phase in the rating process. We say this back is this type of back, and there is a number assigned to that, and those numbers, there's a half a dozen different numbers, and that will influence, for instance, whether this guy is more of a guy who runs wide and probably doesn't get the tough inside yards. But I will also look. I'll chart all season long, by the way. The guy's longest runs, 20 yards or more, where do they go?
Okay.
And so you won't always see a one-to-one relationship. This guy may have had a 25-yard run up the middle that we put off tackle.
Right.
There's multiple reasons why that happens. One is the placement of the runs on the card. There's only so many slots on the card. I can't put it on a 7 if the guy had one run of that length.
Right.
Okay, but if he had a bunch of runs of those lengths, one each, I've only got so many 12s and 2s I can put those things on. All right. Another reason why it might not be a one-for-one relationship is we've rated this guy as the type of back who goes wide a lot more. Well, he had a really good run up the middle. If it's a Justin Spiller, for instance, that's as likely or not to be a trap play or a drop play. It doesn't really reflect that he's a power runner up the middle because his longest run or 3 of his longest 8 runs were up the middle.
Right.
All right. So, we're trying to have the card reflect his personality and his value to the team. And generally, the line buck is a safer play in terms of fumble frequency and all that. If we just loaded up all his longest runs up the middle because he ran them on trap plays on 3rd and 8, that wouldn't really reflect what kind of runner he was.
Right.
So it's tricky.
Yeah.
But we have so much that goes into it to try to make sure that we're not missing a guy big. That we've got his character, we have the data to back it up, we have a scouting report, we have a numerical system that then interprets all of that and puts it in a box for us.
Nice.
You mentioned, I wanted to follow up, Glenn, when you mentioned the scouting earlier. Earlier in the interview, you said we have scouts. Do you have scouts that work independently for Strat-O-Matic, or are you saying that you're a professional scouts who you tap them as a resource and they're professionally used scouts for an NFL team or whatever?
They are not exclusively for Strat-O-Matic. All right, so Strat-O-Matic does hire a service, and it also pays attention to and asks for the input of people who are doing this as a part of their job.
Okay.
And so some of it's volunteer, and some of it's paid.
I had something I've been wondering about in recent years with all the different rules options, and people play the game with different options. When you guys design the cards, is there a rule set? Is there a set of rules that you have in mind as these are the rules that we're designing these cards around? For example, the emphasized linebacker 6 rule, the dump off rule. I mean, those rules had a dramatic effect on increasing passing numbers and completion percentages closer to where they are in the NFL. So if you're designing cards with those rules in mind, or you're designing cards without those rules in mind, it's obviously have a dramatic impact on quarterback, receiver cards and team defense passing cards.
Well, we are not specifically saying because there's a dump-off rule, this card needs to have this kind of a reading on it or this many yards on it. We are not saying because there's a dominant 6 defender rule, cards need to be changed this way. However, we are saying that 6s have a contribution to a team defense card. And that team defense card is a very essential part of the strength of schedule that is influencing the offensive cards who will play against it. So it's not really divorced, it's incorporated, but we aren't specifically saying because there's a 6 dominant rule and this team, this opponent has 3 6s, then this quarterback or this running back or this receiver has to have his card adjusted. It's not that way.
No, but if you're working against a norm, once you establish the norm, all right, for a team, for an NFL stock team, and let's say let's say a team has got all 5 linebackers. Let's say they play 4-3, whatever. They've got 2 5s and a 4. They go 5-5-4 at linebacker. If you're playing with the white die 6 rule for the flat passes being linebackers with no men, that's the quarterbacks facing the team are going to have dramatically different results than if you play without that rule. So I'm kind of like, I was told when you're doing that quarterback card, are you saying all right, none of the optional rules? Are you saying, if you could, like if you told yourself, all right, white die 6 rule for the linebacker, emphasize 6 linebacker rule is the norm. You're gonna and you expect that as a norm. You have to produce a different quarterback card than if you say the white die 6 rule is not the norm, right?
Well, I'm not sure that is right, because what I am saying is that the quarterback cards are going to be influenced by strength of schedule, and the strength of schedule is reflected in the defense cards. And the defensive cards reflect the 0s, 4s, 5s, and 6s. Now, the idea that 6s can, on some rule options, have a more dominant effect. We do not go in after the fact and say, well, gee, we think 50% of the players are using it this way, and therefore we are going to make this adjustment. No, it's a rule option that allows people to play the game more to their liking, according to the way they think the NFL should be personified. And we are, we've got enough options in there that, quite frankly, if you tried to create the card to accommodate every single option, combination of options being played, you'd probably need quite a few different cards for each player.
As well as a psychiatrist.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be doing the job anymore.
Okay, all right. Well, it's been a great interview.
I actually had a conversation like this with a guy about the baseball game many years ago. It was in Philadelphia when I was working there. And he was this big baseball fan, and he said, he tried to play Strat-O-Matic, but the way he wanted it to be was that every batter should really reflect how he did against every individual pitcher. I said, well, there's 1,300 players in the major leagues, and this batter probably faced 100 pitchers this year.
Yeah, each batter's going to have 100 cards. And then the hindsight 2020, some guy was 2 for 4 against a pitcher. Now I'm always going to pinch at him against this pitcher because he was 2 for 4.
Look, it's all as enthusiastic of all of us are about realism and how much that is the aspect of my job, and how much that makes me value Strat-O-Matic, because it is. Its strength is realism. Let's remember, it's a game.
There you go.
And it should be fun. It should be fun.
Absolutely.
If it doesn't pass the fun test, the rest is really kind of beside the point, the way Strat-O-Matic looks like.
We're probably winding down the interview now. I wanted to ask, it's been an excellent interview, and thank you so much again, Glenn, for your time. This has been very informative. There's been occasionally, talk about the right-wrong element of Strat-O-Matic, every offensive player has got a right-wrong column, and the defense calls run or pass, and that determines whether you're going to look on right or wrong. Has there ever been any discussion or thought, preliminary or otherwise? And this is, sounds kind of crazy, I know, and Dennis is probably going to hit me over the head.
That's not Strat.
To getting rid of the right and wrong columns, and maybe having like a column A, B, and C, and getting rid of the defense calls run and pass, because a lot of people feel like NFL defenses don't necessarily call run and pass. They line up a certain way, and they move before the ball a certain way, and then they react to what happens at the snap of the ball. I know it seems kind of crazy because you'd probably end up with a different game, but has there ever been any thought of any preliminary discussion that way at all? Just curious.
Not in my presence, and I would shoot it down if I could.
Good.
Okay.
Here's the thing. If you don't have choices, if you don't have coaches being able to choose, and with the thing that you value, and that is the trade-offs. For every pro, there's a con. If you don't have that in the game, then you've lost a lot.
Yeah,
as a game. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, even rock, paper, scissors. You're making a decision.
Yes.
And your decision plays off the other guy. That's what makes it a game, and that's what makes it something you want to continually play over and over and over again. If it's just essentially a statistical exercise, we'll use column A if it's this, we'll use column B if it's this, and we'll use column C if it's this. You're getting away from what makes it a game.
And Glenn, hold on. Let me get in here. So, right. Glenn, you may find this surprising, but I actually have tried other football games, and I just don't have any idea how my coaching is influencing the game.
Yes,
that's what makes Strat stand alone, is that you can influence. Not always. You're going to double team somebody on Peyton Manning's card, and he's going to complete it. Nothing you can do about that. But there's times where you can have an effect on the game based on your coaching or your play call, and that's why I love Strat.
It's true in all of Strat's games, and I would say in football most of all. I mean, the intensity of the experience of going head-to-head with another human being, trying to get inside their head and trying to, limit their strengths and force them to play their weaknesses, force them to deal with their weaknesses, and how you might develop a different strategy for the same opponent with the same coach at different time because you don't want to be overly predictable. This stuff, I really think it makes Strat-O-Matic football the very best head-to-head game, sports game ever created.
Absolutely.
And
we do love our Strat football.
And I've played hundreds of sports games that are real players. And so I don't say it lightly at all. It's not just because I love Strat-O-Matic. I think, even among the Strat-O-Matic games, that head-to-head value for football sets it apart. You mentioned the way the NFL just lines up. Well, they've got guys who play packages. And the NFL uses guys in run defense. And they take them off the field when they think passes are coming. So I might disagree with you that they're not thinking run, they're not thinking pass. When they put 8 men in a box, they're not expecting a pass.
Well, what I was saying, and I love the way Strat football plays, it's just something that's been bandied about, and I've thought about it. But is that by personnel or by formation, that instead of calling run, I literally have to put 8 men in the box, or I should say the other way around. That if I put 8 men in the box, then I'm going to get a better result stopping the run, as opposed to putting 8 men in the box and calling pass, which you can do in Strat. It happens a lot, But I'm not in favor of that. I was just kind of curious because it's something you see every now and then on the Strat forum, guys posting and stuff like that. But no, I mean, Strat's given so much enjoyment to me since about 1978 that I'm not looking to change that. I'm just interested.
Well, and here's the other part of the fun factor. You remember Strat-O-Matic's rather ill-fated experiment with something called the super fanatical rules?
Yes,
where you could move the players all day long, and it took all day long to move them.
I loved it. I played it. I played it with the 57 or 58 Colts that Ron Brammer, somebody had made me. I liked it a lot. And I think the computer could actually do a great job of simulating that, but I admit that I was in the extreme minority.
And how long did it take you to play that game on the board game?
My brother and I could play it under 2 hours because we were pretty flying,
That's exceptional. Because I figured, when I first asked Hal back then, I said, how much time do you think this is going to add to the game? And I think his answer was, 5 minutes or something. And I said, well, I think it might add 5 minutes per play.
Yeah. We get some of these guys. Some of these guys, that can happen. Strat needs a game clock on the computer against some of these guys. But my brother and I, though, we used to play. We played Super Advanced, of course, and we went back to the old white cards, and we kept playing after '82, of course. But there was a time in the early '80s, like '83, '84, where we would get in the back porch. We'd start a game at about 8:30, and we play from like 8:30 to like 7:30. We play about 45 minutes to an hour game. We play about 6 or 7 games in a row, that way, which is pretty good.
Yeah. The all-day Strat Fest, those are memorable events.
Yeah,
did it with baseball, did it with football. Yeah, it's been great.
Dennis, Glenn, this has been a great interview, very informative. I think I'm a lot of questions. Dennis, do you have anything else for Glenn?
No, I just have one last question, and this is pretty inconsequential.
Please don't let it be about Russell Wilson.
No, it's actually It's actually about Brandon Graham, the curious case of Brandon Graham. Now, he is a backup outside linebacker for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's stuck behind Trent Cole, who is a 4'5'11", I think. Connor Barwin, who is a 56'12'7".
Yep.
And he's a 44'10". How would you ever get him on the field? I thought maybe he should have been rated as a defensive end / outside linebacker, so you could bring him in on third downs. How would does Strat put him in there for like injuries? Is that his the only way he's going to get on there?
Well, how would you have rated those guys? I mean, you said you had rated him as a defensive end, but they have every down defensive ends for the Eagles.
Yeah, I would have made him like a 0-10 defensive end to go with Vinnie Curry on third down.
Oh, what Glenn is saying is he didn't play any defensive end.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. What do you call a linebacker that just comes in on third downs and blitzes the quarterback, though? Isn't that kind of? I think that was his role. But I see what you're saying. It is a tough one. And
if a team uses a rotation, as most of them do, there are times when Cole comes off the field. There's times when Barwin comes off the field. Graham had a very, very efficient pass rushing record, where the pressures that he applied, the sacks he got for the number of sacks, the number of times he was on the field, was exceptional. All right, but Strat guy using 20/20 hindsight and looking at the ratings, I'm not going to rest Trent Cole here. I'm not going to rest Barwin.
Right.
We have every snap, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I thought maybe like juice down.
If you're going to play, so you would do it on injuries, or if you had a rule in your league that basically said, in order to be an every snap player, a guy had to play 85% of the snaps.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's cool.
Now you got to dig into data, but that's the way it's done in baseball. It's the way it's done in basketball.
That's cool.
Baseball, if you wanted this guy to play every day, he had to have 600 at bats or whatever. And we're going to play him 10. We're going to give you 10% cushion. But if he's a 300 at bat player and you want him to play every game, you're not going to get away with that.
Gotcha.
And so if you got a rotation linebacker who maybe played 65% of the snaps, you want him to play 100, you can. It's your game. But if you want to get Brandon Graham on the field, you might need to do some rotation.
Perfect. Good answer. I like it.
Well, actually, that I want to ask a follow-up question on that. Something that guys have talked about in relation to Strat-O-Matic injuries. You talked about in the NFL, there was so much defensive substitution. They rotate defensive linemen in just to keep them fresh.
Yes.
Although I never understood why offensive linemen don't need to be kept fresh, but that's a separate issue. But anyway, they rotate defensive linemen in to keep them fresh. And obviously now with the split ratings, we can see linebacker substitution is going to be common in Strat football as well.
Right.
But the company doesn't really grade backups. There's so much fall off from that 5 defensive tackle to that 0 defensive tackle that if you want to that the idea of rotating players in, like you said, is just not in the culture, and there aren't easy stats on the cards like there are when a guy only has 100 innings or a guy has 200 innings, and okay, I can only use him 100 innings. Trent Cole's card doesn't say that he had 700 snaps on it.
No,
he played in 60% of the Eagles' snaps.
Right.
So is there any thought to grading some of the backups a little better, putting in some kind of rotational system, putting in a snap percentage, so that if guys want to play realistic usage, something like that can happen?
Well, I think it's something to think about in terms of if we
sounds like a lot of work.
When you think about a team defensive card, where would you put those numbers, right? So we've got some logistical issues there. It's not just again, it's realism versus practical. But if you want to bring in Vinnie Curry with his big pass rush rating, you're going to give up the run defense to get it. When are you going to bring him in? You're going to bring him in on third and long.
Right. Yeah, no, I think there, like you said, there is some cases for where Strat does incorporate a rotation just based on those ratings. You're tempted to bring those guys in situations just like in the NFL, but
and the difference between Vinnie Curry and a 6 defensive tackle or defensive end is going to be the difference between a -1 or a +5, or it's going to be the difference at tackle between a 0 and a +6, right? So if it's 3rd and 7. You're not worried about that 0 so much, unless it's going to sacrifice field goal position.
Well, the situation on pass rushing, I think, is a common, easy thing to do. The Brandon Graham case was just an unusual one because I think most guys don't recall seeing a situation like that where you had this backup who was very well, was rated pretty well, but is literally never going to see the field in Strat because the starters are superior and there's no incentive to rotate him. I mean, everyone's going to bring in that defensive end 0-9 on 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 10.
Sure. Well, okay, but here's a guy then who, when you look again across the set, has value in a draft league, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Exactly.
Right? So now he's saying, okay, look, we're treating the stock teams as priority 1, but we're not unmindful of the draft either.
Very good.
I'm glad to hear that.
All right, well, let's end it there. This has been really a fantastic opportunity for the Strat community to get into the mind of one of the creators, the ones that helped make the game. I want to thank you, Glenn, and tell everybody back at headquarters, Hal included, that we really appreciate all the work that goes into this game, and you guys do a great job.
Well, thanks so much for everything. It was great fun, and we'll do it again.
Oh, great. Thanks so much, Glenn. You have a great night.
You too. Take care.
So, Dennis, I think I'm going to close this broadcast.
That sounds good.
Because I think we should leave this a standalone.
Yes, absolutely.
So folks, I'm going to close this broadcast right now. Our great thanks to Glenn Guzzo for contributing so much tonight. This was really a great show. I bet it's going to get many, many views, particularly from Earl. And Glenn offered to come back. So hopefully, we have something we want to talk about in the future. We have the opportunity to get him in there. And hopefully we can give him a lot of feedback on flat passes as runs. And like you said, if you don't like a rule that Strat proposes, maybe try playing some games with it, preferably against a human online. More than a half. Play at least a dozen games or so, and maybe give the company some feedback on the forum, send them an email, whatever they'd like to hear from us. Thank you so much to Glenn. This is Tom signing off for Dennis.